Okay, so this research is following on from the work that Josh has been talking about. And it was just a first demonstration to try and see if actually doing some interrow cropping would actually help the pollination of avocados in terms of insect numbers, and also having a look at soil health within the avocado orchard. Now, as I mentioned, it's not really a trial. It was just basically a demonstration. We were able to get some replicates in, which I'll explain to you, but basically we were just trying to see if doing it in the interrow rather than looking at adjacent pastures or adjacent bush might be a particular management technique that would be useful to the process. So looking at it, the main research question was basically to see if we can increase the plant diversity within the interrows of an avocado orchard. Does that firstly change the species richness? That's the types of species in the orchard and the numbers of pollinators and other beneficial insects. And does it have an effect on the soil health within the orchard? So you can see the diagram on the left. With the brown rows, they were the ones doing with normal management, and the blue rows with the cover crop, which I'll explain in a moment. So the methodology basically was very simple. The demonstration site was on Andrew and Nuala Scott's avocado farm in Balingup, and the demonstration ran from June to November last year, 2021. With the agronomist Deb Archdeacon, that many of you will know, managing the demonstration for us. The two control rows, we had two double rows. They were mowed and treated as per the usual management. You can see them on the left of the screen. So absolutely nothing in there, mowed flat. And two double rows were planted with a mixture of cereal oats and crimson clover. That's the top right and the bottom right. So you can see the crimson clover flowering quite profusely there. Soil samples were taken before the planting and also when the crimson clover was in full flower to see what was happening in the soil. Looking particularly at dissolved organic carbon and then the microbial biomass, basically the living matter in the soil, looking at carbon and nitrogen to measure that. In terms of the insect surveys, we did both pan trapping, the same as Josh did. You can see them on the left-hand side there, stretching through the row, and sweep netting also in the same rows, which is basically just consists of drawing a standardized insect net just over the surface of the plants, back and forth 5 times, and then you collect and observe and count the insects that we have. We also did some direct observations within the orchard on that day. Although it wasn't an ideal day, coming back to what Josh was talking about before, because it wasn't a very sunny day. But it's pretty much what we did. Anyway, so looking at some of the results, in terms of soil health, the first thing that we noticed was there's no demonstrable change in dissolved organic carbon. It pretty much stayed the same, both in the control rows and in the interrows. So no change there. But it's a little bit complex to see there, but the top batch of the results show the cropped interrows. That's where we had the crimson clover and oats, and then the bottom is the usual practice. And as you can see, both microbial biomass carbon and microbial biomass from nitrogen was higher in the cropped interrows to begin with, and quite a bit higher at the end of the experiment. There is some statistical significance in this, but it's not a true replicated scientific study. This is what we're hoping to do as the next stage. This was really just a demonstration to try and get an idea of what if anything, was happening. So in terms of insect numbers and diversity, the same again, the cropped interrows versus the usual practice. In terms of the pan traps, more than double the number of insects and a few more species, particularly native bees. There were more of those in the cropped interrows. and a similar pattern with the sweep netting, showing very similar results, more species and more insects. So let's have a look quickly, just summarize those results. In terms of the soil health, as I mentioned before, the microbial biomass was slightly higher, measured as both carbon and nitrogen, but it was only just statistically significant. So this really does need to be tried through a proper replicated trial, which can show the actual differences if there are any. The insects, however, that particularly the pan traps being almost twice as many insects and with more bee species, that was statistically significant, even with the low number of replicates that we had. So definitely a lot more insects, marginal change in soil health. So as I mentioned a couple of times already, these results are very, very preliminary. So we're planning to do some more in-depth trials, properly replicated scientific trials this year. If you are interested to have these run on your property, you can contact Wendy, who organized this and who contacted you in the first place, on either of these contact details. Thank you. And please feel free to ask any questions afterwards. Bye.
Thank you, Mike. Wendy, do you want to take over?
I just want to thank Mike for that. We'll do the interview with Andrew, the farmer, and at the end of that you can put questions to either Mike or Andrew, but I thought it might be helpful to get Andrew's take on the practicalities of the management practice, I guess, of interrow cropping. Are you with us, Andrew?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So, Andrew, can you just tell us a bit about Ridgewood Farm, please? Just give people a context of what you do, where you come from, your philosophy, etc.
We're a really small farm compared to the people around Pemberton and Manjimup. We've only got about 500 trees. We're in a frost-prone area, but the last 2 or 3 years we haven't had any real frost to speak of. We've got state forest on both sides of the property and farming properties on the other sides. We are replanting our creek line. We don't use any pesticides on the property, and we take our agronomy advice from Deb Archdeacon. Previous to that, we used to take advice from Graham Thomas in Queensland, but Deb Archdeacon, living locally, seems to be more spot on for local conditions. We use a lot of not chemical fertilizers, but liquid fertilizers. And we've just come off our biggest year ever of avocados, which was 37 tonne per hectare. Normally we would expect to be around 20 tonne a hectare.
How long have you been on the property, and how long have the avocados been there, Andrew?
30 years we've been here, and we've planted, initially we planted 30 avocados of 5 different species because we really didn't know what we were doing, and saw how they went and learned a bit from growing them, and then we expanded into Hass on Guatemalan rootstocks that we brought from Anderson's in the eastern states, and they went very well. And then we expanded using a Zutano rootstock for expanding the orchard. They didn't perform as well as what we thought they would, and plus they got hit with 35 significant frost events. So we replaced them with Doosa 2 rootstock, clonal rootstocks, and they came from Birdwood in Queensland, which is now Fleming's. We also have a frost fan, which hasn't really had much use over the last 2 years. And we also have our own bees, which we have in the orchard. And we endeavour to have minimal intervention in terms of insects and things like that. We're also doing a part of a planting trial where we're revegetating the creek lines, which are within 200 metres of the orchard, and planting a lot of flowering species in there as well, so we can increase the diversity.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, Andrew's part of another pollinator project that we have that incorporates that revegetation, and we do insect surveys for that as well, and bird surveys. But can you describe a bit about what you had to do for the Interrow cropping project?
Yeah, we were asked to participate. It was quite late in autumn when we got going, and it was hard to source the machinery to seed properly in between the rows where we were putting the crimson clover and the oats in. And we actually had, shortly after we did seed, we had a huge rain event which washed a lot of the seeds out of the furrows, so we had to reseed with the crimson clover. And last winter was an exceedingly wet winter, and it was quite cool but not frosty, and the seeds took a long time to get going. But by the time we came to our flowering season for the avocados, they were in the crimson clover. I was very surprised how well it went. And the oats, they just were bouncing out of the ground. We did add recommendations from Deb on what fertilizers to apply with the seed, and we did spray off to kill off all the broadleaf weeds before we seeded it. And we did turn over the soil a bit with a hand rotate the soil, and that seemed to work quite well. And if you look at the rows now, after we mowed them down at the flowering season, we haven't had the broadleaf come back, and we haven't, the rows are looking quite good.
Interesting. So did you find it easy to implement?
Yeah, it was a bit of a rush because it was so late and I was rushing to get it in, take advantage of the soil temperature while the soil was still warm. But I would start a lot earlier this year, and we probably will do it on another alternative rows to what we've done, and work progressively through the orchard, because when the clover was flowering and you walked through those rows, there was a real hum in the air, and this flowering season was quite cool. So we weren't getting a heavy flowering, and we weren't getting a lot of bees in the orchard because of the cool weather. But the rows where the crimson clover was flowering, it was fairly humming all the time. And now that we're at the point where we're getting up to small sized fruit, I think that there is a higher fruit set in those rows. Coming off what was such a heavy year, well, I wasn't expecting that.
You did mention machinery was a bit of an issue, so you couldn't utilise existing machinery, or?
Yeah, well, we don't have a lot of machinery on the place, and trying to find a small seeder that would fit down the rows just wasn't going to happen. I couldn't find one, source one in time. So we actually had a tow behind seeder, spike seeder, which did the job in the end, but it was not able to do specific placement of the seed at a certain depth. So I think that's why we had a lot of trouble with the rain washing the seed away.
Yeah. So do you think it's cost effective?
I think so. It improves the soil and it improves the insects. And that's something we're always aiming to do in the orchard.
Yeah. So I guess you've already told us your observations that you think there was much higher insect activity in those
Yes.
rows, and you think there's a higher fruit set.
Yes, I think there is a higher fruit set, and it was a very cool flowering season. And, you know, with avocados, you need to have those higher nighttime temperatures and daytime temperatures to get the pollen to be fertile. And those rows seem to have done better, even though we had those cool temperatures. And it was a late flowering.
Yeah, it was. It was a very unusual season, wasn't it?
Mm.
This spring, I think. Just went from winter to summer. So you're thinking of implementing across the whole orchard?
Yes, we will be.
Yeah. Okay. Would anyone else like to ask questions, either of Andrew or Mike? Thanks very much, Andrew. Appreciate your time sharing your experiences with other people. So would it be better self-seeding cover? No, I'll let you do it, Pete, because you can see everybody.
Yeah, sorry, no, I just asked a couple of questions myself in the chat box there, but we've just had a couple come through. So, yeah, would it be better self-seeding clover? Any comments on that?
I think the self-seeding clover would possibly be a better option in terms of long-term management, just simply to have a good clover base. Crimson clover has the advantage that it is a more attractive clover type for pollinators, which is why it was chosen. It also seems to do better for soil health. But that feeds into the next question. The trials that we do want to put together for this coming season would be with a further mix of species. So we do want to try several mixes of species, and brassicas would be part of that mix.
Very good. Don't have any other questions at the moment. Yep.
Can I ask one? Sorry, can I ask? It's just I'm a hopeless typer.
That's all right. That's why we've let you unmute and ask.
Yeah, I was just wondering about if there was a comment maybe by Mike on the number of different species, like for the interrow crops. Should you be selective and really choose like 2 or 3 particular species that work for your area as far as flowering timing goes, or should you just sort of go for a shotgun approach and just plant like 5 or 6 or 7 different species in there, or even more? I was just wondering, whether numbers matter like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim, that's actually a very complex question, because at the end of the day, we don't know enough about which species that are suitable for interrow cropping, because not all species are suitable for it, but which species that are suitable for interrow cropping and that you can get seed for and everything else are most attractive to which pollinating insects. So there's still a huge gap in knowledge in that respect. We've been doing parallel to this quite a bit of research in our other projects, trying to identify native species that we could use and looking at their usefulness in terms of pollinating insects. So the 2 projects are sort of feeding together, but at the moment we wouldn't have enough data to be able to answer that question properly.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks.
We just had a couple of others come through. Steph asked, did you slash at all? And I think Kathy's alluded to the same question. Did you mulch after flowering?
We didn't slash until the clover was pretty much finished and we were ready to harvest the avocados. And we actually, a lot of it was actually crushed by the squirrel going through, but we went through after that and mowed it. But the rest of the orchard we mow every couple of weeks.
We've got a couple there from Kathy. Actually, we've got two different Kathys. Sorry, we've got Kathy Dawson, then Kathy Hoare, and then Kathy Dawson again. Kathy Dawson, I was actually maybe Kathy Hoare first. Yes, what have we got here? Large growers implement. How would large growers implement this, especially in regards to controlled traffic? And as we aren't able to seed every year due to the amount of hectares, we would have to cover. Any comments on that? I'm not sure if any.
Yep, that sort of feeds into what Tim was asking before in terms, or it was also asked by Kathy, with the self-seeding clovers and some of the other plants that we're looking at. As I said, this was really just a demonstration to have, or a sort of a trial to have a look at what does work. Is it feasible? Can the farmer deal with the slightly changed management regime, etc.? And to gain an idea of, is this a trial that's worth looking at? And I think the preliminary results, as Andrew has indicated, show that it's definitely worthwhile looking at in more detail, looking at higher species numbers, looking at self-seeding species. That feeds into what Kathy is talking about. Borage. Borage might be a useful species, not in the interrow, but actually under the rows, under the avocados themselves. There are a range of other species that might be useful as well. But at the moment, it is still really early days. There's some promising, interesting results, but we can't really provide full-scale management advice to a large-scale grower. But hopefully this will develop. If we can get some good trials going this coming season, we'll get some clearer answers on some of those questions.
Did you just cover off on that, on Kathy Dawson's question as well there, Mike?
Yep, with the borage.
Borage,
yes.
Yeah, yep. Any other questions? I'm happy if people want to unmute and just ask. Were any clarifications there from those who have asked?
There was one question I actually didn't ask Andrew, and that was, were there any issues? Because I think access was a bit of an issue for them. Like, is that correct?
Well, before you did your insect sweeps, we were picking, and we were picking the lower branches. So it meant that we were walking through the rows and trying to minimise our traffic through so that we didn't damage the trial. But that was the only issue. And I think if it had been a normal year, by the time we were picking, the flowering would have been finished normally. Like I said, we had 37 tonne per hectare, so we had to pick because we were looking at the season was going to be so tight to get it all off in the normal frame of mind. But with the lighter fruit set this year, we won't be picking till late November, December, which is what we normally would do. So there's going to be a lot less fruit around this coming year, this coming season. So I would imagine that the packing sheds are going to be ringing up wanting people to pick early so that they can fulfill their commitments.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah.
Just one more there, or a couple more come through. What fertiliser did you apply in the seeded rows? Kathy did join late, but I don't think you did actually cover that one, Andrew.
No, well, Deb recommended a number of fertilisers, so we actually put some guano on. We did some lime, and we also did potash. And I think I also ran ran through with our normal avocado eco growth that we use on our standard fertilising for the trees. The other thing about that is that the rows where the trial was, because we didn't want to damage it, we fertilise every month. So we're fertilising something every week or so. So when we put our eco growth in, that meant carrying buckets of fertiliser down the rows, doing the fertilising for those rows.
And we've heard another one from Steph Carstairs about snails. She's implemented some lucerne and cover in interrows, but found that snails come in big numbers. Have you had any problems like that with some snails or other pests?
No, we didn't have any snail problems. We do have a small planting of olives, about 40 trees, and they had the tiny little snails on them, but we just don't get them in the avocado orchard.
There was one question from Kathy Dawson, Andrew, that I don't think you've talked about. Have you mulched the rows after flowering?
When we mow, we throw the mowings go back under the trees, and every 3 years we put another layer of barley straw underneath them, so about 4 or 5 inches thick, and then we can't afford to do it every year, so we just do it every 3rd year.
One more there, yeah, from Kathy Hoare. So no other insect pest pressure from the Interrow crop, for example, loopers?
No. We have very little problems with insects, and we've never sprayed. Back 25 years ago, we used to spray for the weevils underneath the trees, and that worked sometimes and sometimes it didn't work. And then we decided not to spray for them, and we normally get a little bit of damage on the branches that are touching the ground, but I can't tell you the last time I've noticed it as being a real problem. Fruit that's touching the ground, you'll get some chewing on that. But I think when we did an integrated pest management seminar, they talked about the larvae from the hoverflies actually breeds up on the broadleaf roots, and that attacks the larvae of the weevils. So I think they're just in balance currently. But, you know, you've got to remember we're only a small orchard, and a lot of the practices we have would be very hard to implement on a large orchard.